This is what's known as the cheat card. And you'll see there's an awful lot of numbers on here. And if you didn't notice yet, it's in German. But that doesn't matter because even if it was in English, it would still be hard to understand. Now, when I first started in photography, I like to read up on things and become more knowledgeable. And I came across this and how it was explained. The first thing I saw was what appeared to be fractions, and then I immediately had a flashback to high school and thought about how horrible I am at math. And I'm like, I'm never going to figure this out. It's all like math and stuff. Everything's got a number next. So what are all these numbers for? Well, um, the only thing we're going to concern ourselves with today is aperture and our shutter speed. And those are just these first two up here. We're going to ignore ISO for now, completely ignore it. What this is showing us here is we're going to take one of these at a time because they do kind of work separately. But so let's start up here. This represents your aperture settings. And aperture settings are known as f-stops, focal range. So basically, what this is showing here, and I'm going to say this is as simply as I can, the further away something is that you want in focus, the higher the aperture or the higher the f-stop. So the aperture is actually a lot more closed the further away you want to see. The aperture opens wider, wider, wider till we get here where we are focused at a very shallow depth of field and the background is complete blur. So you'll see here we have a very deep focal view where we can see not only the subject up front and also the mountains behind him. Way over here on this end with the aperture completely stepped down to 1.4 is blurry. So what do you need to know about this? All you need to know is this: the further away you are from your subject that you want in focus, the narrower the aperture setting. The closer you are and you want to blur out the background, your aperture gets wider. That's all you need to know. Those are the two things you need to know. And 90% of the time, you're going to be over here, right on this guy over here, or maybe in here. But typically, when you're taking photos, you're taking pictures of people. You're going to just leave your aperture setting around this area here. When you get into doing landscape photography, then you're more over on this side. Your aperture is more narrow. It's letting less light in, but that light is more focused and over a distance. So that's all you need to know. These numbers, you can learn those later. You can go back and memorize these. There'll be a quiz at the end. But all you need to know is this picture. This picture tells you everything right here. Here's your aperture, and it's closed more when you want to take a shot that's further away, and it's open wide when you want to take a shot that's close up with the background out of focus. These numbers, do they mean anything? Well, yeah, they mean a lot. It means 1/1000th of a second, 1/500th of a second. So that's what you're seeing here. And the quicker the shutter snaps, so 1/1000th of a second, you can stop somebody dead in their tracks. Somebody's racing by you, you snap it, 1/1000th of a second, it looked like they're standing still. And that's all in this range here, depending on, what your settings need to be. Like, race car versus a basketball game, you're probably going to be not up here with a basketball game. You'll be down lower in here. And anything below 1/60th is when you need to leave the shutter open longer. And I'm going to explain when you need to leave the shutter open longer. But when you do have to have the shutter open longer, it's also very, very difficult to hold the camera still. So you can go down to, what they say is like 1/60th of a second. You can hand hold the camera and take a picture and ensure that it's not blurry. Anywhere below that, and you're going to want to use a tripod. When do you use a tripod? Well, you would use a tripod when you're taking pictures like this, where you want to see something way off in the distance. You want clarity, of the background as well as the foreground. A lot of that nature photography, obviously, you're looking over a greater distance and your subject matter is, expansive. So you want to be able to focus in on all that detail at a greater distance. So that's why your shutter would be open a little longer, because it's balancing with this. Now that I've told you all that, and I tried to keep it simple, I'm going to make it even easier where you don't really have to look at this. And I have a prop I'm going to use. So let's check that out. All right, so here I have with me my little prop, my trusty little prop here, and this is going to represent our camera. And what we have here, the bottom of the cup itself, is the sensor. That's what's capturing the image in your camera. So when this cup fills up to the top with liquid, you took a picture. Then magic camera fairies take it from the sensor onto your card. Don't have to worry about that now. We just need to know that this is the sensor. When you take a picture, and let's say light's coming in to the top here, light is pouring in, let's call it liquid. Okay, we'll use liquid as an example. If I have water dripping down in here, you'll notice that hole, water will go through it, but it's going to go through very slowly. So in order for our sensor to get that image, it's going to take longer. And that length, that time, is your shutter speed. That's what we're seeing. So the less light getting in, and the longer it takes light to get in, the longer we would want to leave our shutter open to allow that light to get in. So that's how shutter speed works with your aperture. So basically, if I took this off, can't even get the lid off. If I took the lid off and we now pour this with water, it would take mere seconds to fill up. So our shutter speed is much quicker. We don't have to leave the shutter open long. If we left the shutter open long, it would overflow and we would overexpose our image. So that's what that is that time that allows, the wide open aperture, all that water pouring in, this thing's going to fill up. That means that shutter needs to turn off real quick. We got to open and close it real quick to let just enough in and not overflow. Whereas if we close that shutter back down again, close the aperture back down again, and we let water flow in there, it's going to take more time, so we have to leave our shutter open longer. So now if I take you back over to our illustration, we'll go through it one more time and see if it makes a little more sense. All right, here we are back to our cheat card, and we're going to start right up here at the top again. Remember our lid from our cup? Well, here we go. Here's the lid completely closed. Here's that cup with the lid completely off. That we're allowing light to enter very, very fast. So we're only getting a shallow depth of field. And that would be for portrait photography for the most part. Now, we're going to go back down here, but I want to do a couple of things. First, I want to just get rid of those pictures because I think they're kind of confusing in respect to what I'm talking about here. And not only did I remove the pictures, but I also flipped these numbers around. And this is just for a very simple reason. It's always showing when you see these charts, they step down. So, the higher numbers here and it steps down. But if we're comparing our shutter speed to our aperture opening, these numbers kind of make a little bit more sense if they're flipped the other way. Meaning, and I'm not saying these are definitive, but meaning that if your shutter is going to stay open longer. It's going to work with your aperture to let in more light. So when you want something at a distance, your aperture is a little more closed, but you leave your shutter open longer to capture more light. Conversely, over here we have, the aperture is wide open. That lid is completely off our cup. So we want to have a faster shutter speed. And like I said, once again, these numbers do not correspond directly. Okay, these are just, I'm just trying to show you that the more light you need to let in over a distance, the longer you're going to need your shutter to be open. For closer range, the less time you need to have your shutter open. For the purposes of, where you're at, like on a daily basis, if you're setting up to do a photo shoot with someone, you're probably going to be right about in here, 125 to 250, maybe even a little bit less. Honestly, I mentioned before that 1/60th is the slowest you can, basically handhold a camera. But I would say 1/80th of a second is a better bet, because that way I think you're more guaranteed that you're going to get a stable shot. You really have to lock in at 160 to stabilize that camera. So typically, with everyday photography, if you're just taking pictures of your friends and stuff, you're going to be in this range with your shutter speed, because you're going to have a wide open aperture, because you're just taking a picture of your subject. You're not taking a picture of a landscape. So the other thing that I wanted to show, because this does work independently as well, let's put these pictures back in here and kind of go over what these mean. Now, independently of how much light is let in and how fast the shutter goes, the shutter also dictates speed, like I mentioned earlier with the cups. What this is showing, when it shows this little figure here and he keeps getting blurrier as we go along here, that's not just your eyes. That means that at 1/1000th of a shutter speed, you can freeze that action. When you get to 1/4 of a shutter, that action is going to be blurred. So not only are you dealing with subject matter, like a subject with a blurred background versus long distance shot, we also have the action as well, or the speed of the action. If you're taking pictures at a racetrack, like I said, you're going to be way over here. If you're doing something more sports like football, baseball, anything like that, you're probably going to be right in this range here if you're trying to stop the action. And then again, light plays a factor, but once again, those are the two things that a shutter does. It allows more lighting, and you just have to think of it in terms of, if you think of it logically, how long would it take for a bus to travel from a mile away than it would to travel from a couple of yards away? That's what we have to think of, how fast it's traveling for us, or how fast it's traveling in space. Well, I hope that helped you guys today. I don't know if it did or not, but I know it's one thing to really understand, all the really important things that, I'm kind of glossing over here. And I do that because, I'm not here to explain how a camera works. I'm here to help you take pictures. So if I can make it easier and kind of take the math out of it, because that, like I said, that always was what was intimidating to me, was the math part, and I had to find a way around the math. So like I said, two simple rules: the farther you are away from something, the longer you have to keep your shutter open to enable the light to come in. If you want to take something at a great distance, if you're taking pictures of people, shutter's just snapping away, because you're in close, you've got a shallow distance. Now, there are other things that factor into all of this, of course. Those numbers, if you really want to understand it, I'm sure there's better videos than this that will explain the math and all the other logistics of it. That's not for me, man. That's not what I do. So, it's definitely something you need to learn. You should learn. but I don't want it to stop you from experimenting and being able to understand how to do things in a simpler way. For me, it's got to be simple. I want it simple. I want it explained in a way that I can understand. So I hope that helped you out today. That's all I got for you. You guys have a great one. We'll see you next time.